From the outset, Jimmy Kimmel has had a contentious relationship with Elon Musk, rooted in a clash of perspectives shaped by their respective environments. Kimmel, entrenched in the progressive epicenter of Hollywood, operates within a cultural bubble that often amplifies left-leaning ideologies. This setting has influenced his comedic style and public persona, particularly in his persistent critiques of political figures like Donald Trump. His past, however, includes controversial moments, such as videos where he appeared in blackface, for which he issued apologies. These incidents, rather than prompting restraint, seem to push him further into a combative stance, doubling down on his role as a vocal critic of conservative figures. Critics, including voices like Joe Rogan and Megyn Kelly, have seized on this, painting Kimmel as a figure out of touch with broader audiences, a product of Hollywood's self-congratulatory echo chamber. Kimmel's late-night show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, has become a lightning rod for controversy, particularly following a $500 million lawsuit filed against him by Trump. The suit, described as a dramatic escalation rather than a mere legal formality, has sparked widespread commentary. Rogan, known for his unfiltered takes, found the situation uproariously funny, likening it to a comedic misfire of epic proportions. He suggested Kimmel's nightly jabs at Trump were less about wit and more about pandering to a pre-primed audience, propped up by applause signs and a warm-up crew coaching spectators to laugh on cue. Rogan argued that Kimmel's monologues lack the sharpness of true comedy, instead relying on predictable, teleprompter-fed zingers that play it safe while masquerading as bold. The lawsuit, in Rogan's view, was not just a legal maneuver but a psychological one, designed to unsettle Kimmel and force him to rethink his approach. The idea of Kimmel sweating over legal documents, haunted by the prospect of court dates, amused Rogan, who saw it as a fitting consequence for someone who mistook a talk show desk for a shield. Megyn Kelly, approaching the situation with a more surgical precision, echoed Rogan's sentiments but with a cooler, more analytical tone. She described Kimmel as a once edgy comic who had morphed into a polished, corporate-approved figure, trading genuine humor for sanctimonious outrage. Kelly pointed to Kimmel's earlier work, like The Man Show, which embraced a raw, irreverent style, as evidence of a comedic spark that has since faded. Now, she argued, Kimmel's act feels like a desperate bid for relevance, leaning heavily on anti-Trump material that lacks originality or risk. Kelly framed the lawsuit as a predictable outcome of Kimmel's hubris, suggesting he underestimated Trump's willingness to retaliate. She dismissed the notion that Kimmel's comedy was protected by some untouchable bubble, arguing that his nightly attacks on Trump were less about free speech and more about chasing ratings through provocation. The lawsuit, in her view, was a wake-up call, shattering the illusion that late-night hosts can lob insults without consequence. The broader context of Kimmel's struggles lies in the declining relevance of late-night television. Once a cultural cornerstone, shows like Kimmel's are hemorrhaging viewers. Recent data cited in discussions around the lawsuit pegged Kimmel's average nightly audience at 1.5 million, with just 236,000 in the key demographic, a stark contrast to the numbers commanded by figures like Tucker Carlson, whose online videos reportedly garner tens of millions of views. Critics point out that Kimmel's show, backed by a major network like ABC, should theoretically dominate in reach, yet it struggles to compete with low-budget, independent content creators. This disparity underscores a shift in how audiences consume media, with traditional late-night formats appearing increasingly outdated. Rogan, in particular, relished this point, noting that Carlson's modest productions from a main cabin outperform Kimmel's multimillion-dollar operation, highlighting a disconnect between Hollywood's polished output and the raw, direct appeal of newer platforms. Kimmel's history of controversial sketches, particularly those involving blackface, has resurfaced in this moment of scrutiny. Clips of him impersonating figures like Karl Malone or Oprah Winfrey in racially charged skits have been cited as evidence of hypocrisy, given his current role as a moral arbiter on social issues. Rogan and Kelly both referenced these incidents, with Rogan calling out the selective outrage of Hollywood, where past transgressions are forgiven for those aligned with the right ideology. Kelly went further, suggesting Kimmel's apologies for these sketches were less about accountability and more about damage control, allowing him to pivot to a sanctimonious persona without addressing the underlying contradictions. This critique paints Kimmel as emblematic of a broader Hollywood double standard, where progressive credentials shield certain figures from the kind of cancellation others might face. The lawsuit itself, a $500 million claim, is described as both a legal and symbolic gesture. Rogan framed it as Trump flexing his influence, not just to seek financial damages but to dominate Kimmel's mental space. The sheer scale of the suit, $500 million, feels almost cartoonish, yet it underscores the seriousness of Trump's response. Rogan imagined Kimmel frantically scrubbing old clips from the internet, aware that each joke could now be dissected in a courtroom. Kelly, meanwhile, saw the lawsuit as a broader warning to the entertainment industry. The era of consequence-free celebrity activism is waning. She argued that Kimmel's nightly Trump bashing was less about comedy and more about signaling virtue to a like-minded audience, a strategy that worked until it didn't. The lawsuit, in her view, was less about silencing Kimmel and more about reminding him that actions have repercussions, especially when targeting someone with Trump's resources and resolve. Kimmel's response to the lawsuit, as captured in his show, leaned into defiance but betrayed a sense of unease. Addressing his audience, he acknowledged the dismal mood following Trump's political victories, framing the moment as a setback for various causes: women's rights, immigration, healthcare, and climate initiatives. Yet this somber reflection was quickly overshadowed by the legal storm brewing around him. Critics like Rogan and Kelly seized on this, arguing that Kimmel's attempt to rally his audience felt hollow, a rehashing of the same talking points that fueled his feud with Trump in the first place. Rogan, with his signature irreverence, mocked the idea that Kimmel's show could claim moral high ground while relying on scripted outrage and a laugh track to sell it. Kelly, more pointedly, suggested Kimmel's sanctimonious tone was a calculated act, one that played well in Hollywood but fell flat when faced with real-world consequences. The decline of late-night television, as exemplified by Kimmel's struggles, is part of a larger cultural shift. Shows like The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon and The Daily Show have also seen plummeting ratings, with Fallon's audience dropping from 2.3 million in 2017 to 1.3 million recently, and The Daily Show under new hosts drawing just 366,000 viewers compared to over 2 million during Jon Stewart's peak. These numbers pale in comparison to cable shows like Greg Gutfeld's, which consistently outperform network late-night offerings despite requiring a paid subscription. Rogan and Kelly both pointed to this as evidence of a broken business model, one that fails to adapt to changing viewer habits. The reliance on formulaic comedy, heavy-handed political commentary, and a captive studio audience feels increasingly out of step with an audience that craves authenticity and direct engagement. Rogan's takedown of Kimmel was laced with humor but carried a sharp edge. He described Kimmel's comedy as warm milk, safe, bland, and forgettable, designed to soothe rather than challenge. He contrasted this with the raw energy of platforms like podcasts or independent videos, which thrive by speaking directly to viewers without the filter of a network. Kimmel's reliance on a team of writers, a teleprompter, and a coached audience, Rogan argued, creates a feedback loop that insulates him from reality. The lawsuit, in this context, becomes a reality check, forcing Kimmel to confront the limits of his influence. Rogan's laughter at the situation was not just about Kimmel's predicament, but the absurdity of a late-night host thinking he could take on a figure like Trump without blowback. Kelly, meanwhile, framed Kimmel's downfall as a case study in overreach. She recalled his earlier days as a boundary-pushing comic, contrasting that with his current role as a self-appointed voice of the resistance. The lawsuit, she argued, was not just about Trump but about exposing the fragility of Kimmel's persona. By leaning so heavily into anti-Trump humor, Kimmel made himself a target, assuming his Hollywood credentials and studio applause would protect him. Kelly's critique was less about the legal merits of the lawsuit and more about the cultural shift it represented, a rejection of the idea that celebrities can attack with impunity. She suggested Kimmel's team was likely scrambling to rewrite scripts, torn between maintaining their edgy image and avoiding further legal trouble. The spectacle of Kimmel's clash with Trump has drawn comparisons to a comedic roast gone wrong. Rogan and Kelly both reveled in the irony of Kimmel, a master of mockery, finding himself on the receiving end. Rogan imagined Kimmel's writer's room as a bunker, with the host desperately trying to craft jokes that won't land him in court. Kelly, with a wry smile, suggested Kimmel might try to spin the lawsuit into a sympathy play, casting himself as a victim of political overreach. Yet both agreed that the damage was done, not just to Kimmel's reputation but to the broader late-night format, which struggles to remain relevant in an era of fragmented media. Ultimately, the Kimmel-Trump saga is less about a single lawsuit and more about a cultural reckoning. Kimmel's brand of comedy, once a staple of American entertainment, now feels like a relic, outpaced by nimbler, more authentic voices. Rogan and Kelly, from their respective platforms, have capitalized on this moment to highlight the disconnect between Hollywood's elite and the broader public. For Rogan, it's a chance to laugh at the absurdity of a talk show host overplaying his hand. For Kelly, it's a moment of karmic justice, where a figure who thrived on provocation learns the cost of crossing the wrong line. As Kimmel navigates the fallout, The question isn't just whether he can survive the lawsuit, but whether late-night television itself can adapt to a world that no longer needs its canned laughter or scripted outrage.